A rebuilding season in 2025 over Mizzou's dead body.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And boy, the Tigers have really focused on the secondary, adding yet another body to the defensive backfield. Going to talk about that and more portal movements on the show. But I just wanted to start off by saying, well, first of all, sorry for a little bit late of a start here. I had to watch the daughters all day with school out and also had to dig us out of the snow as well. So that messed with my usual schedule. But I want to start here by saying, but just taking a look at the big picture and especially the outlook for 2025, because, of course, Missouri lost a bunch of significant guys last season, including guys who had been around for a long time. I'm talking about guys like Darius Robinson, Chris Abrams-Drain, Ennis Rakestraw, and, of course, Cody Schrader. And now with Brady Cook, Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Christian Williams, Johnny Walker, et cetera, all these different guys who have been very big pieces of this team for the last couple seasons, this truly feels like the end of an era. And for all these seasons, all these decades really until recently, as my fan in my fandom of college football, I would have to have assumed a pretty significant rebuilding season at Missouri. Think about 2009, where Missouri lost Chase Daniel, Martin Rucker, Chase Kaufman, a whole bunch of people from the previous two rosters, and still ended up making a bowl game, and of course had a really memorable season with Denario Alexander. But obviously the Tigers would go on to bigger and better things in 2010 and even bigger and better things in 13 and 14. But as far as this idea that 2025 is going to be a rebuild, well, Missouri is not acting like that's the case whatsoever. And by Missouri, of course, I mean Eli Drinkwitz, but just as importantly, the entire Mizzou NIL infrastructure. Because once again, while there was a lot of consternation a couple weeks ago when Missouri was losing some very celebrated freshmen from the roster, of course, Williams Winery being your headliner there, along with Kewan Lacey, Jalen Brown, Courtney Crutchfield. Those are guys that Missouri didn't want to lose, but also, to be brutally honest, were not guys who were significant contributors on the two deep last season. And yet, Missouri loses a bunch of guys in the portal process. Let's count them up here. 3, 6, 9, 11 guys they've have so far outgoing in the portal. But among those guys, I would say that really Jalen Brown was somewhat of a contributor this season, and also Mekhi Miller, a veteran who wound up at Tulsa. The brutal, honest take here is that kind of what Eli Drinkwitz said. He's looking for production over potential. And right now, those guys, a lot of them landed at good landing spots, obviously like Ole Miss, Nebraska, South Carolina, Arkansas, NC State. But again, compare that to, 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 guys coming in. So that's a net of 3 guys for Missouri already. But all 14 of those guys that Missouri is bringing in, well, you're expecting them to be contributors next season, on the two deep at the very least, and in most cases, starters. So I'm pretty confident that Missouri is going to be good again next year. The question is just how good are the Tigers going to be next year? A lot of that obviously is going to rest on a lot of these transfers, most notably Bo Prabula, the quarterback from Penn State. But I will say it's also, a lot of it's going to be on the new look Tiger secondary, which to me showed its warts off in the second half of the season. Of course, as the competition in the SEC got better as the Tigers moved on from non-conference play. But here's the good news. The Tigers have really focused on the secondary. I brought up Stephen Hall at cornerback from Washington State. Well, Missouri's really added some bodies at the safety position as well and is still in on some corners. Most recently, though, it's Jalen Catalon, who played at Arkansas, Texas, and then Barry Odom's UNLV team last season. By the way, all the way back in 2020, Catalon was a first-team All-SEC player at Arkansas as a redshirt freshman, then spent his next two seasons at Texas, which were mostly injury-laden. So that helps, along with, of course, 2020 not counting for anyone. He got an injury waiver. That explains why in 2025, Catalon is very much still eligible. He started 13 games for Odom's Rebels last year, 96 tackles along with 5 interceptions. He was an all-MWC type of player last season, so this is a great addition for Eli Drinkwitz and his defense. Obviously, Corey Batoon and Drinkwitz seemed to agree that they needed to upgrade the secondary and just the safety position in general, just losing so much experience at that spot with Joseph Charleston and others moving on, Sidney Williams, Trevez Johnson as well. So not only Jalen Catalon in the fold, but also Mose Phillips from West Virginia and Santana Banner from Northern Illinois as well. Looks like the Tigers may be signing, again, an additional corner or two in addition to Jalen Catalon. So the Tigers really attacking what I thought became a bit of a weakness toward the end of the season. Now, I've noticed a lot of talk about transfer portal trends on the Mizzou beat here lately, and the main trend that I've noticed is that, quite simply, the transfer portal is not slowing down. And under the current circumstances, why would it? For the most part, if you're a good player, entering the portal increases your leverage and your open market value, again, if you are an in-demand player. It creates a bidding war. What if Patrick Mahomes, for example, who's maybe, the 10th or 11th highest paid quarterback in the league in terms of average annual salary right now, well, what if he could just suddenly at any time say, hey, guys, I'm a free agent? You think he might get a little bit more money than what he's getting right now? Well, this is the situation that a lot of college football players find themselves in, where if they want to hit their max value, quite honestly, they're at the very least going to have to enter the portal and likely are going to have to transfer and go to another team. So that's why, one of many reasons why you're seeing guys transfer not just once or twice, often 3 and 4 times, something that was, of course, unheard of in the previous system. Well, trust me, if pro baseball players and football players and basketball players, if there was a model in which they could opt out of their contracts every single season, well, the ones who could get more money that very offseason, a lot of them probably would, especially in a world where that's all that's available. It's all year to year. If we lived in a world where Luther Burden III or someone could sign for a 4-year contract and here's the terms and yada, 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 well, then it would be a different reality. The problem is, at least from the perspective of people who would like that system, well, you're going to need a union of some sort. There's going to have to be collective bargaining, this whole deal. Yes, just another step toward making college football more like the NFL. And you know what? This cold, nasty day in mid-Missouri seems like a great time to open up the old mailbag and answer some of your questions and comments, including somebody who has seen Missouri's new running back, Ahmad Hardy, up close and personal, and a name you're all familiar with, signing up to play with Bill Belichick next season. So let's get to all that in a minute. But first, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NBA playoffs, let's face it, they're better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose, the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. You know, I love betting on the NBA, college basketball, basketball, everything, but also the NFL playoffs as well. It's all there for you at FanDuel. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com today to join. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So longtime listener and viewer, right? You can view and listen at the same time if you're on YouTube. I never quite know. I always say listener, but I'm like, wait, they're viewing. I'm overcomplicating this. But regardless, Jeff in Cabo says, I was born and grew up in Missouri, but have been in Monroe, Louisiana for many, many years. This kid, Ahmad Hardy, Missouri's new running back, is a major get for Mizzou, just what the doctor ordered. Super fast, tough, and has great instincts. Great job, Mizzou. Well, I got to say, from the little I've seen from Ahmad Hardy, I was really, really impressed as well. So it's great to hear from Jeff in Cabo, a guy who's seen him up close and personal. Again, at Hardy, a kid from Louisiana, Monroe, his freshman year. That's the beauty of this, really. Not only is Hardy a really impressive player from my eyes, but also 3 years of eligibility. Listen, maybe I'm being incredibly naive here, especially I just laid out that every single year people can transfer. Heck, maybe we're just the second of 4 stops here for Ahmad Hardy, realistically. But gosh darn it, it's still real to me. Damn it. I like to believe in my naive young mind that Ahmad Hardy can still be here for the long haul. By the way, I would point out that Miles McVay, a player that Missouri was no doubt looking at least a little bit, at least was in contact with in the transfer portal, former East St. Louis High School offensive lineman, very coveted as well. Missouri was very much on him. He ended up with Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide, but after 1 year with the horrible T-shirt selection of Kalen DeBoer, Miles McVay decided, the heck with this. I'm going to go with somebody with real taste in fashion and wardrobe. That, of course, being Bill Belichick at North Carolina. So in all seriousness, I think that's a really interesting landing spot for McVay. If Belichick has brought his old offensive line coach with him, I can absolutely see why McVay would go there. But regardless, Bill Belichick, yeah, there's a guy who can probably coach you up on the finer points of being an NFL player. I can certainly understand the allure in that particular case. And by the way, obviously a less than ideal travel environment over the last couple days. And the Missouri Tiger basketball team, well, that was no exception for them. Missouri just returned from Auburn, actually, that Saturday afternoon basketball game just early this morning here on Monday. So a less than ideal start for the LSU game, which is tomorrow. A less than ideal preparation, setup, sleep, all that good stuff. Hey, it may not be perfect for LSU getting down here either. The Tigers and LSU reportedly in contact all the time here. I got to think with the weather forecast here, Missouri returning, I think the LSU-Missouri game should be on in Columbia tomorrow. But regardless, this is a game the Tigers need to win really badly tomorrow to avoid an 0-2 start in the SEC. Really the next two, as I said in my previous episode, this game at home, Vanderbilt at home on Saturday. Realistically, if the Tigers are going to make the NCAA tournament, you probably got to win those two, with Florida looming in Gainesville in Game 4 there for Missouri. Speaking of Tiger basketball, I thought an interesting comment here from Mary, a 4%er, by the way. I'm always excited when a member of the female portion of the audience weighs in. She says, T.O. Barrett is my favorite point guard since Phil Pressey. Now, I just thought that was a stunning comment because obviously I'm not ready to go that far. The guy's attempted 10 field goals and 8 free throws so far on the season. By the way, I'd point out that Anthony Robinson is a point guard as well. Drew Smith, also one of my favorite Tigers in recent memory, not only for his game, but also his toughness as well. But when it comes to T.O. Barrett, I do really like his size and his handle for the point guard position. Frankly, I haven't seen enough to make a huge judgment other than that. I'm just fascinated, though, by people's opinions, what they see, maybe earlier than what I'm willing to go out on a limb with. So Mary, at least, a big fan of T.O. Barrett. And Carrie says, hey, John, lifelong fan, true son here, live in mid-Missouri. What's your take on student athletes not being restricted to 4 years of eligibility as long as they are enrolled as a student? Why couldn't a player getting 2 bachelor's degrees, hypothetically, play 8 years? Well, honestly, that's a question I've asked myself recently. So much of the old guard, the old way of doing things in college football and basketball has been completely thrown out the door. So you do have to ask yourself, why are we so beholden to the 4 years? As I just pointed out, Jalen Catalon here is going to be entering his, I believe, 7th season of college football here in 2025. If I'm doing my math correctly, his first season was 2019. Let's put it that way. Longer than 4 years by quite a spell. All I will say, one thing that does seem inevitable. I don't know about the, hey, get a couple bachelor's degrees and play 8 years. I don't know that we're ever going to get to that point. But here's what I do think is inevitable. Maybe as soon even as next season. I think 5 years is coming. In other words, the red shirt, that's just going to be a thing of the past. I think every single player is going to come in with 5 years of eligibility. I think that's going to be coming sooner rather than later. And Just a Fan of Sports on YouTube says, John, you mentioned you really don't like how SMU and Boise are not likely at all to win the national championship. Actually, I believe what I said is they don't have a dog's chance in hell of winning the national championship, but I digress. He continues, do you have this kind of issue with the men's basketball tournament? Do we really think the low seeds have chances to win the national championship in basketball? Yet we throw everybody in because it's fun. I know there are different sports, but I think we need to look and examine why each have such different perspectives. Just curious how you compare the two. Well, if you could have a 64-team football championship, and you could actually cram that into 3 weeks, then maybe we'd have a discussion there. But of course, in football, that would take at least 6 weeks, more than likely longer than that. They would space it out longer than that, I would say. So that's just not really a comparison just in terms of how these sports are scheduled out for obvious reasons. I would also point out that, for example, say you expand the playoff to, well, let's just stick with the 12-team format. Say Boise and SMU are the 11th and 12th best teams in the field. Let's just say that that's true. Well, in the NCAA tournament, whoever is the 11th and 12th best teams in the country are going to be 3 and 4 seeds in March Madness. Not only do those teams have pretty likely chances of upsetting a 1 seed, it happens all the time. And in fact, 3 and 4 seeds not only can, but have won national championships in March Madness. To me, just the likelihood there of a 12 beating a 1 is just, it's not even comparable in basketball to football. And I think a lot of this is just personal preference. To me, I think the perfect number, if we're going to expand the playoff, I think 8 was the number. I just truly don't think we need this to last for 4 weeks. That's just a personal preference thing. Perhaps you all disagree with that, but it's already starting to feel like the playoff is dragging on a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to be perched in front of my TV watching these semifinal and final games. But I still think, the whole March Madness thing, again, if we could cram 64 teams in 6 rounds into 3 weeks, that'd be another discussion, but that's just not realistic for basketball. Or for football, excuse me. I'll get it right. And former Missouri linebacker Chad Bailey, who spent his entire career with the Tigers, did weigh in on this new transfer environment. I thought he had some pretty interesting comments, so let's talk about those coming up in just a second. But first, yes, it's game time, and attending the new college football playoff Well, if you could actually get there, that'd be a heck of an experience. Well, Gametime can absolutely help you make that happen. And they have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes it easier to sort out all the fluff. Just get right to the best ticket deals available. Recently, I used Gametime Picks to find tickets for bragging rights, browsing through the deals, total breeze. And even though I didn't go to bragging rights, I was able to, again, just find exactly what the market was and decided, maybe next year, that type of deal. So you don't even have to pull the trigger. But when you do, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So one thing to keep in mind is that revenue sharing is going to be coming to college football. So this is going to be somewhat of a de facto salary cap to some extent. So that means that part of Missouri's early NIL lead is somewhat dissipating a bit. And it's got me thinking, what if the only reason certain players commit to Missouri is because of an NIL offer? If it's simply because Missouri was the highest bidder? Well, cool. Nothing wrong with that per se. But from Missouri's perspective, or any team's perspective, then you get this player for a year, and then what? Then you have to go back to the negotiating table, quite possibly, and then, well, that player's gone. I think you may have seen some examples of that in this cycle, certainly, for the Tigers. Not so much complaining about it, just what is the reality here? I just think, how does anybody navigate this would be my question, and I think that has a lot to do with the frustration Eli Drinkwitz was expressing a couple weeks ago when he made his now famous remarks about valuing production over potential. Well, speaking of values, here's something Chad Bailey, the former Missouri linebacker, was talking about on his social media. He said, athletes, there is nothing wrong with transferring. And again, this comes from Chad Bailey, a guy who stayed at Missouri his entire career. Athletes, there is nothing wrong with transferring, but everything has a process that you're going to have to go through sooner or later. Be comfortable with going through the process. Instead of comparing yourself to another person, comparing yourself to the person that you were yesterday. In other words, the grass isn't always greener on the other side, as that cliche goes. So his point is, Chad Bailey is saying, hey, if you're not getting the playing time that you feel like you want or you deserve or whatever that might be, simply transferring is not always the answer. Maybe it's finding a mirror and saying, hey, what do I have to do as a player to get better? How do I become better as a player? Because simply transferring is not going to make you a better player. That's one thing I think a lot of guys have to keep in mind. And finally, YouTube commenter Spirit of Jazz says about my intro to this podcast, you throwing out Frank Zappa references with the Central Scrutinizer line? Ah, yes, Spirit of Jazz. Finally, applause to you. Somebody finally gets my reference. So I've been talking a little bit lately on this show if I'm actually old or not. Well, the reality is I'm middle-aged, I think, at this point. But when you're throwing out references at the top of the show, dated references to fairly obscure albums from 1979, well, I think you're officially old then, no question about that. But hopefully this program has not gotten old to you, and thank you, as always, for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou and making this show your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On SEC on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts as well. Gosh, I really want to get back on the SEC squad, but I think they're going to record during the LSU game tomorrow, so no promises. I don't know what to tell you. I was kind of hinting, can we change the recording schedule a little bit? Kind of to deaf ears so far, so we'll see what happens. Hope to be back on the squad soon, but regardless, I'll be here for you all the time right here on Locked On Mizzou.